Hi, we are Group 5 and this is our case study on indigenous farming in the Philippines. So, farming in the Philippines, let's start off with some statistics. The Philippines is considered as an agricultural country as it employs 39.8% of the labor force of the country and contributes to about 20% of the country's GDP. Moreover, the Philippines' main agricultural crops include rice, corn, coconut, sugarcane, bananas, pineapple, coffee, mangoes, tobacco, and abaca. Now let's talk about the rice production in the Philippines. Excuse me. So, rice production in the Philippines is known to be not only an important factor to the country's food supply, but as well as the country's economy. The Philippines is known to be the eighth largest rice producer in the world, contributing to about 2.8% of the global rice production. Despite being one of the top producers of rice, the Philippines was considered to be the world's largest rice importer in the year of 2019. Despite being an agricultural country, there has been a lack of funding and exposure by the government and social media, respectively. As said by Senator Francis Pangilinan, the Filipino farmers are experiencing discrimination as they are neglected, forgotten, and abandoned. The farmers aren't being treated properly and are usually underpaid. Now let's talk about indigenous farming in the Philippines. So first, on the old traditional farming methods, we have crop rotation. Crop rotation is used to plant different types of crops in one area or land in order to boost soil quality, increase the nutrients found in soil, and fight pests destroying the said crops. We also have following. It is a technique used by the farmers in which they leave cultivable land available to allow the land to restore and contain organic matter while retaining their nutrients and moisture. Next, we have water harvesting. Since the Philippines lies on a typhoon belt, the farmers made use of this by using rain collectors instead of using money to construct expensive irrigation systems. The other sources of water are usually spring water or deep wells. Then we have the delineation of areas. Farmers in the Philippines tend to separate their houses from their farming area in order to avoid unintended contamination of crops from household chemicals. They also avoid transferring from one place to another to prevent the transfer of insects and pesticides to neighboring areas. And then we have our typhoon resistant crops. Because typhoons can ruin good crops living above ground, the farmers in the Philippines focus more on planting crops that live underground, such as sweet potatoes, garlic, and onions. Now let's talk about the benefits of indigenous farming. We have pest control. Planting different types of crops every season can disrupt the life cycle of insects and weeds. Next, on the preservation of soil quality, since different types of crops also need different types of nutrients, traditional methods can stop the soil from wearing and tearing. And onwards to the prevention of soil erosion. Transitioning from planting crops with long roots to planting ones with short roots can lessen the stress applied on the soil and minimize surface runoffs. After that, we have the minimal use of fertilizer. Because one of the goals of traditional farming is to preserve oil quality, minimal to no usage of fertilizers usually occur. Next, we have the prevention of water pollution. Since minimal to since minimal to no fertilizers used, water runoff is most of the time not contaminated. Now let us talk about the advantages and disadvantages of indigenous farming. First, let's talk about the advantages. First, no fertilizers. This means that the crops are fresher and healthier to consume because it does not have chemicals. Higher market price. Since the farmers did not use any artificial fertilizers or chemicals, the crops can be considered organic, in which prices of these crops are competitively higher than others. Recycling of waste. After decomposing, fertilizer used for the soil came from the waste of previous crops. Now we have the disadvantages. Consuming more time. It usually takes around an average of 15 days to harvest a crop. There's also a slow return of investment due to the longer period of time in planting. There's also a high chance of having soil disease. It also takes long periods of time to decompose, and pesticides are utilized. Now let's talk about one of the world famous indigenous farming sites in the Philippines, the Banawe Rice Terraces. So, what are the Banawe Rice Terraces? Well, these are a man made system of irrigated rice terraces in the mountain of north central Luzon, the Philippines. These were created more than 2,000 years ago by the Ifugao people. Although they are located in many several villages, it is collectively known as the Banawe Rice Terraces. According to the reports, the terraces, which resemble steps carved into the mountainside, cover some 4,000 square miles, and their total length is estimated at approximately 12,500 miles. While the rice terraces are important to the Ifugao economy, they also serve a cultural function, requiring intensive cooperation among the people. So, what is the Ifugao farming system? It is a community-based farming practice where able members of each household help each other in order to maintain the fields from field preparation to harvesting. They routinely exchange seeds when one variety is learned to perform well or when a farmer loses a particular variety. Now, why did the Ifugaos build the rice terraces in the first place? It is self-sufficient in food, timber, and water, allowing the rice terraces to stand alone independently. The heavy availability of water allowed the Ifugaos to build the rice terraces and create their system. The Banawe rice terraces served a major role in the livelihood of Ifugaos, allowing them to have a steady supply of food and water. The impact of Banawe rice terraces to the society of the Ifugaos. It is an important part of the community's sustainable and primarily communal system of rice production. It serves as a dramatic testimony to the ability of the community to avoid detrimental effects. It serves up to today as a memorial to the history of hard labor of the many small scale farmers who work together as a community who have created a beautiful landscape based on the uses of natural resources. Now let's talk about the current situation of indigenous farmers in the Philippines. As previously mentioned in the introduction, our fellow farmers are often neglected and underpaid, especially the indigenous farmers. According to the NSCB Secretary General Jose Ramon G. Albert, the agricultural sector receives the lowest average of daily basic wage compared to other sectors, with, with only average daily wage of 158.8 to 178.43 pesos only. Moreover, poverty incidence among the indigenous farmers is 36.7%. The funds that were supposed to go to the farmers were instead stolen by other people. Such examples include the PDAF pork barrel scam and the 728 million pesos fertilizer scam. The government continues to neglect the situation of farmers, therefore, the maltreatment and poverty among this sector continues to worsen over time. Now, to conclude, we recognize the efforts put into for indigenous farming to be made possible. We also recognize that despite all this work, farmers and the agricultural sector continues to be neglected and undermined. This system, however, cannot simply be demolished because thousands of farmers have been relying on indigenous farming as their source of livelihood, their source of food, and it is a self-sufficient system completely independent until harvesting season. They can't leave it abandoned, especially when it occupies a lot of space. And again, effort. But like other farming system, this indigenous form also has advantages and disadvantages. The crops are organic due to minimal use of fertilizers. Pesticides have to be utilized and it takes up more time and manual labor. So these are our references. And once again, we are Group 5 and this is our case study of indigenous farming in the Philippines. Thank you.